Namaste, Namaskaram, Vanakkam, Namo Namaha, Jai Ganesha. Please visit our website at classicalyoga.org, and there is a donate button if you would like to help us out. And please stand up for the Hindu, yoga, religious, spiritual, scientific, philosophical lifestyle. Today's podcast, Only One, Part 2. Please listen to Only One. That's no fun. In other words, that's Part 1. And this is Part 2 as we go deeper into the good, the bad, and the ugly of the one God. Obviously, in life, there is a time for commitment, for seeking a one way in life, a one profession, a one spouse, a one religion. But as we reviewed in our first podcast, this can become very detrimental if we, especially in the religious realm, believe that our one deity, our one religion, our one way is the only true way, and every other way is false at best or outright evil. Now, there is a goodness to the religions of the world in the sense that it brings people together, sense of community, and it is inevitable. I mean, those that think that someday religion will disappear, well, think again, because these are just human beings getting together, trying to figure out what holds them together as individuals, as families, as societies. This is essentially the meaning of the essential word for religion, religio, to link, to bind. So too, in the specific religion of Hinduism, the Hindu yoga dharma, we use the word dharma, which has a very similar meaning, dri, meaning trying to figure out what holds life together. So too, our many practices of yoga is our understanding of what yokes, Y-O-K-E, or yuj, what yokes us together. So again, never confusing generalities and specifics. There's the religious process in general, and then recognizing the specific religions of the world. So religion is not only an inevitable thing, but it can be a very good thing. I mean, religious communities do a lot for the general community at large. They feed people, they clothe people. They're generally there in times of disasters. And certainly for older people, if all of a sudden all of the churches from villages and towns and cities were removed, it'd be a pretty lonely place for a lot of people, especially the older people who use these community centers as great places of just that, community, people coming together to laugh and joke and enjoy each other's company and help their fellow human beings. Many churches, and the Catholic Church is really good at this, I mean, they give out free food to people regardless of what religion they are, if any religion at all. This is a good lesson for our fellow Hindus, that though we have a deep, and I would say a very superior philosophical and intellectual understanding of the essence of life and of the inner essence, which we call the Atmana, we really fall flat when it comes to our social responsibilities one to the other. And yet we believe in the wisdom of karma yoga and bhakti yoga, ethics, selfless service. But very often we do not really exemplify this in helping our fellow human beings. This is where we can learn from our Christian brothers and sisters to more selflessly serve each other and the communities at large. Many Hindu temples and ashrams, for example, suffer from a lack of attendance and suffer from a lack of finances, as many Hindus just do not seem willing to want to donate to their temples, their mandirs, their ashrams. Here again, where we as Hindus can learn a lot from our fellow Christians. So there is an undeniable goodness to religious organizations. Where they obviously turn bad is when they become extreme fundamentalists, extreme sectarianists, when they believe that they have the only way and they try to indoctrinate others into that ideology. And then many even go a step further throughout history, right up to the present, where religion becomes ugly, when individuals are not content to simply offer, if you will, their ideas on their religion to others, but force them down their throat. The history of religious conflicts and wars is well documented, though often it's conflated. In other words, that the vast majority of wars throughout history have not been for religious reasons, though someone might make the case that there might be some underlying beliefs there. The vast majority of wars are just over land and territory and property and egoism, domination. However, we can't deny the religious wars that have happened throughout the ages, and the vast majority of those are really coming from the monotheistic traditions by their very name, since they believe that they have the one way. Now, our first book from the ashram was called The American Dream, Waking Up, published back in 1993. And we actually have read the entire book on our podcast, so you can go back over these. We have a chapter 8, entitled One Way. Now, we'll read a selected section of that chapter, but if you research through our podcast, you can go through the entire chapter as well as the entire book. So, from The American Dream, Waking Up, Chapter 8, One Way. Anyone who has traveled to some degree and or studied even a little about other cultures and religions, or perhaps simply gotten to know their neighbors in a large cosmopolitan city, will realize that there are many fine ethical, moral, and religious spiritual individuals that come from diverse backgrounds, cultures, and religions. It would appear then that all the great religions, with their profound scriptures and meaningful rituals, can be used as tools to carve out a rich spiritual religious life for their adherents. One has only taken the time to study a little of these great faiths and show enough concern to meet with some of the followers to see the truth in this. And it would appear that all the great prophets, the mystics, if you will, the so-called spiritual messengers, past and present, that are generally credited as the impetus behind the various religions, they could be viewed as great examples of the human potential to reach for divine qualities, if you will. Love, light. It is also clear that one could decide to misuse these tools and idolize the prophets, creating potentially dangerous cults. Remember that cult is not necessarily a bad word. It's actually where we get the word culture. The dictionary defines cult as, quote, intense devotion to a particular person, idea, or thing. Therefore, there are cults in the entertainment industry, in the sports world, in the academic world. It seems that there have always been certain individuals, or even ideas by definition, food, music, etc., that individuals are intensely devoted to. Therefore, by definition, even the devoted spouse is a practicing cultist in their intense devotion to a particular person. Again, this is where we get culture, through the intense devotion to art, music, food, etc. To sum up this exclusive, often erroneous Christian attitude, for example, Psalms 93 was used incorrectly for 1,500 years to promote the false concept of geocentrism. Let me back up a minute. Generally speaking, a cult is more often than not associated with a religious figure, who could certainly be viewed in many ways by different people. These religious figureheads are generally at the forefront of any subsequent religion, often in their name. It should not be surprising to learn that most of the religions of the world began as small cults. Certainly, Christianity, by definition of intense devotion to a particular person, Jesus, classifies as today's world's largest cult. Subsequently, in the history of religious development, these initially small cults, more often than not persecuted, grow into full-blown, if you will, religions. Over time, these religions frequently branch off into various sects or theological differences, and often into further cultic movements as a group rallies around the new leader. It's inevitable. Often, however, the potential for violence, or meism, if you will, intensifies when the cult, religion, or sect begins to believe that they have found, or what they have found is exclusive and thus authoritative. When this, quote, only way, unquote, mindset becomes entrenched in the minds of the followers and then gains the added benefit of political clout, then obviously all subsequent writings, scriptures, doctrines, and creeds become authoritative and beyond reproach. And as we have seen, this has been and still is the position taken by many in Christianity. To sum up this exclusive, often erroneous Christian attitude, for example, Psalms 93 was used incorrectly for 1,500 years to promote the false concept of geocentrism. The patriarchal story of the Garden of Eden programmed many early on to view women as subordinate, and stories such as the Levite and his concubine, Judges 19, continue to reinforce woman's inferior position. Genesis 1:28 produced a mindset in many that contributed greatly to species disregard and extermination, as well as laying the foundation for many contemporary ecological disasters. Chapter 4 of Genesis marks, quote-unquote, the demise of the black race. And verses such as Leviticus 25:44 and 1 Peter 2:18 easily justified and sustained the institution of slavery, as European slavers cruised the African coast in boats named Jesus, Angel, and Grace of God. Deuteronomy chapter 17 and Psalms 2, 8, and 9 contributed to laying a foundation for racial tension in the minds of many, fully justifying the bigotry that has existed up to the present against those outside the fold. Such exclusive rhetoric definitely inspired many Christian explorers from Columbus on to take possession of other people's lands, rape the natural resources, and often completely exterminating the, quote, heathen, unquote. Not only has this kind of immature one-upsmanship proven to be dangerous to those outside the Christian faith, but within as well, as numerous holy wars exemplify. Even today, many Catholics and Protestants and numerous other Christian sects continue to slug it out physically and or psychologically, as each sect, within an exclusive religion, seeks their own exclusivity, searching in vain for the, quote, true church, unquote. It is interesting to note that early Greeks and Romans were very suspect of the rites and symbols of the newly emerging cult of Christianity. Many don't realize it, but the early Christians were suspected of engaging in sexual orgies and cannibalism. This upon hearing of the agape love feasts and the partaking of a man's body and blood. This young cult was also considered to be illicit, vile, and dangerous for its mystery, admission of the lower classes, and lack of national ties, respectively. This, of course, among other factors, all stemmed from a lack of understanding of the Christian symbolism, and unfortunately how history has repeated itself as unenlightened Christians have sought to destroy the symbols and images of all the religions they have subsequently come in contact with. One wonders how someone with no prior exposure entering a Christian church would view a naked, emaciated man nailed to a cross. Just what would run through their mind, or would they simply run out? Unfortunately, entering into the 21st century, there are still quite a handful from divergent cultures and religions who refuse to attempt to understand the religious symbols of the many other great religions of the world. Call it arrogance or indifference. It all boils down to an embarrassing ignorance that human beings can ill afford to continue, especially when all the religions of the world may find they have actually so much in common. At this point, let's remember our EDMA formula. EDME, ethics, devotion, meditation, enlightenment. This is life in general, and certainly we find this in all the religions of the world. They all have their ethical codes of conduct, their devotions, their meditations or concentrations, and they keep up this process. and it produces what one could call an inner state of enlightenment, epiphanies, realizations, revelations. So what's the bottom line on the religions of the world, the good, the bad, and the ugly? The only one? Remember our Vitarka Mudra from Only One, Part 1? Zero to many is closer to reality. So regarding other cultures, races, and religions, if we break this laziness or fear that resides in many of us, we might be surprised to find out that many of us are seeing the same universal light, feelings of energy and love. We may be all feeling the same sense of longing and experiencing the same sense of satisfaction, security, and love. However, it is clear that when we, as individuals and groups, lose sight of these more universal goals of love, light, and energy, if you will, and get lost in the power plays fueled by religious dogma, and naive, or those that full well know what they're doing, so-called spiritual leaders, the violence will only continue. These quote-unquote religious power plays can be extremely violent, especially when they center around a messianic individual. In defense of these prophets, though, assuredly many have led deeply mystical, religious, spiritual, kind, and loving lives. However, it is often generally the subsequent priestly caste, if you will, that develops that appears to often pervert the original message. This has certainly been the case to a great extent concerning the building of the Christian edifice, which was gradually built, defined and redefined over the ensuing years after Yeshua, the Jewish prophet, whose name was changed in religion to Jesus the Christian after his death. Therefore, regarding all these prophets and mystics that we find around the world, it appears that the individual and the group can choose to positively emulate them or to negatively idolize their person. We certainly can revere or worship with all our being that aspect of divinity that appeals to us. But, for example, for the Hindu to read of Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, quote, "Give me thy heart, serve me, cling in faith and love and reverence to me," and then expects everybody else to do the same, this person is in for a rude awakening. To the Muslim who repeats, "La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah," there's no Allah but Allah, meaning there's no God but Allah. And Muhammad is his prophet. And then they expect everybody else to repeat the same. This person is in for a rude awakening. And on and on. And to the Christian who believes that Jesus is the only Son of God, and even in their theology, who was Adam? And thus the only way to salvation, this person is in for a rude awakening. This is true of any individual or group of individuals that claim to not only know this quote-unquote God, or their current so-called spiritual leader, but they also claim to have exclusive rights and knowledge about this deity. This is like saying, out of one side of our mouth, God, if you will, is omnipresent, and then out of the other side of our mouth, yes, but only according to our tradition. It makes no sense. This, of course, is illogical. Vitarka Mudra has to make sense. Is it logical? Is it rational? If not, disregard. Perhaps this is what the Native Americans referred to when they said the white man spoke with a forked tongue. A thinking person has to wonder if this something sometimes called God is truly omnipresent, or by ecclesiastical chicanery is this quote-unquote God only omnipresent according to a particular viewpoint. Now, a personal form of a spirit being can certainly be appealed to and even felt by individuals. Who's to say? However, to idolize this personal form in one's own mind to the exclusion and condemnation of other forms is to create the potential for the violent, religiously motivated battles we have seen throughout history. This is sad. Especially since this kind of behavior is avoidable. For example, can anyone, regardless of their religious or sectarian belief, bring forth their personal deity for all to see? As someone else quoted, if humans were made in the image of God, how come we're not all invisible? End quote. What we can do as humans is choose to bring forth these spiritual qualities, if you will, of love, compassion, understanding, tolerance for all to see, charity. Isn't it these qualities that the deity is supposed to represent that are paramount? It would appear that, certainly, a primary reason for the existence of the many religions is to reach for a religious spiritual dream, a state of realization, if you will, a dream of love and unity and spiritual awareness. We must ask ourselves if that dream can become a reality by excluding each other. Will dogmatic blinders continue to create further illusions? Hindus especially should not be susceptible to this, as we understand the process of Maya. Or must that dream be one that includes all the great traditions of the world, the great scriptures and prophets and followers as well? Wouldn't this be a dream based on a faith in the creative process? Recognizing a wisdom that our feeble attempts at theology, greater than that? A dream that includes all, but one that also transcends all. So, in other words, religion is here to stay. So why not be willing to question it, and perhaps redefine? Then we can all have a nice day. Zero to many is closer to reality, hence the Sanskrit, Tamil, Hindu neuter term Brahman for the Big Bang, you see. Monotheism can be rather crude, indeed rather monistic polymorphism, dharmanupati dharmi. Om Shanti, peace. Peace through justice and strength. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.